Hey y'all, this is Reverence for Impulse, and we are Weena and Tim, sister and brother.
We're both into somatics and movement, and this season we're talking about relationships.
And how the impulses towards connection, protection, and creation shape the way we come together.
Thanks for following your impulse to listen in.
I think what I loved most about this podcast was sitting down with someone I knew nothing about. Our guest was Finn Deerhart, and Tim and he have known each other as dear friends for a good while. I've heard his name, but before we sat down for this recording, I'd never even seen a picture of him. And in many ways, I think this kind of not knowing freed me up to follow my curiosity with a little more ease. Finn, as a sex and intimacy coach, has such a depth of experience of bodies and impulse. And even though we did get into the topic of sex and relating to impulse with bodies more towards the middle and end, I think we only got in about halfway, which means we need a part two. And I know I almost always say that after all these conversations, but I really do mean it. Finn has a brilliant intellect and a sharp clarity about what he really values. We both hope that you really enjoy this one. Let us know what you think.
I'm curious, I want to ask a couple questions. This theme of impulse in relationship, what does that evoke for you, Finn? If you hear an exploration of impulse inside of relationship, where does it take you in your mind or feeling?
Well, before I say that, anything about that, I want to just name that I do feel a draw to Weena and kind of don't want to bridge. I want to talk to Weena. I'm excited about that. Yeah. So I don't know if that's quelling to any anxieties or.
I'll just sit back. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the contact. So about impulse in relationship, in any relational context with anyone, or in
what does impulse, when I say impulse or Tim says impulse, what does that mean? What is impulse to you?
I suppose it's an arising that it's to be expressed in some way, maybe whether it's a movement toward or away, or to not move, or some sort of message or information. I think somatically or psychically is how I'm riffing. I don't really have a
that resonates for me.
Yeah.
And then if you think of what do you do? I don't know what are you a therapist? Is that right?
I'm a sex counselor.
Okay. Oh, well, that's interesting, because then we're working with impulse quite a bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a kind of maybe I think about this and say this, there's maybe the movement, the arising, and then there's the membrane or the container holding back. I think for some reason a cell is coming to mind. There's the movements of the cell, but then there's the membrane and kind of the container, which maybe defines what happens with the impulse.
How porous or not that membrane is. Yeah.
Yeah, where it could go, what it could do. If there's no membrane, it's kind of
spills. Yeah.
Yeah. I think of things that way, forces that balance each other. And for some reason, stars are coming to mind too. The formation of stars. I've been geeking out about that lately.
Yeah, I think I think about that push and pull in relationship. I guess ideally everything is kind of a sum of its kind of the push and the pull. If somebody's pushing, exploding out through a membrane, there's going to be something else there. I guess I have some kind of a faith that there's something there besides continual output of impulse never ending. There's always something coming back and maybe flowing, it's all relationship. Remember we had some conversation in a previous podcast, where you got lost in all this vagueness of everything being relationship ultimately.
And everything ultimately impulse. So when I initially think of impulse, and ask, like an authentic movement, you can follow impulse or deny or whatever. But any reaction to impulse is also an impulse. So in the end, everything's impulse, really. So it starts to become a like theoretical or philosophical frame and a semantic nightmare. But I think when I think of bodily impulse and even just the word sex that you said, and then coach, which did you say coach?
Counselor.
Counselor.
Yeah.
You're talking about that triangle of three, which we are here too. And that, there's the impulse that how much it would shift and change in a triangle like that versus just a duo. That's really interesting to me, because I guess I'm curious, in your work, do you find that the impulses that are moving towards connection or protection within a partnership, let's say, are shifting and different because you're there? Yeah.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. They're unable to kind of choreograph the typical cycle that they might have in the conversations, because I'm not in like an embodied like experience with them. That's why I don't say coach, actually, because people think, oh, you do like surrogacy work, and I don't. But yeah, like I hold that space, and then we help them kind of, what are you actually saying? But they have a very entrenched way of hearing the other, and yeah, and trying to really break outside of that. So that's how I think of my work, really, is like, how do I help you hear?
It's not that different from what I mean. I would say I focus on like, how can I help you see? But same. Yeah.
And can you give me like an example so I can see it in my head?
Yeah. So like authentic movement, like we just did. I'll take because we're talking, and I hear what you're saying in that patterns. We have patterned ways of seeing another, even if they're a stranger. But if I am able to sit with myself seeing, like watch myself see, and this is where language is helpful, I think, to not have in the mix, no conversation, then I feel all the impulses toward the ways I might connect or protect, or my own patterns in how I see someone. And I just have to be with it. And then we switch. And then I'm with all the patterns of how I connect or protect to myself when I'm being seen. So when someone's witnessing me, what strategies or patterns come online in that, between 5 and 40 minutes, whatever we're doing, and then coming together and sharing it. So talking about personal experience. But what's interesting to me about your work, and it's sort of new, is working with people who have established patterns. Most of the people that come into authentic movement in my groups they don't know each other. So they're really in touch with their own patterns, but not intimate, familial, whatever couple patterns. I mean, you've done it, Tim. Would you say that's true? Or accurate?
Yeah. And I think some of your work, Finn, is with couples, and others is just like one-on-one with people as well, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And in retreats. But you know what, actually, what you said, I love the thing about seeing. It's like, not what am I seeing, but how am I seeing? Like, what kind of like imperatives am I bringing to this like active witnessing or seeing? And is this like a filter for power or whatever, like whatever it is that we're looking for or into? Yeah. And being able to like see without those layers as deeply as possible. And I guess that's a practice, huh? Like a deep practice of,
right.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep asking Finn questions, Tim, so you're going to have to jump in.
Okay.
Finn, how did you find this work? Like, what drew you to do this?
My own issues. Yeah, deep issues around sexuality, and also just a drive to understand. I think for me, it was like one of I get the place where I would feel the most shame in myself, and was surfacing so much, and so it just felt like it was kind of pulling me into the work. I didn't really set out to be this. I used to be a personal trainer before I got into this work, which was about YouTube.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, bodies. But also too like the layer like of sexuality that underlies, I think, everything that's moving. So when I worked through a lot of physical stuff with personal training, then it naturally led me to a deeper place in me around sexuality. And then I could look back and see like, oh, that was also me trying to get to this point in my own body journey. But those questions just became so burning in me that I wanted to shift to sexuality more specifically. And then it kind of just evolved. It's bizarre. I never really put a whole lot of thought into it. I just put a lot of energy into the movement once it started.
Mm. So it was just you were just following impulse into all this. Yeah. And here you are. And do you feel like it's where you want to be?
It's interesting. These days, it's not as enlivening to me in the context in which I do it. It's more like I'm wanting to let that energy take me into a more broad conversation. I don't think anything is like absent of sexuality, anything that we experience, but just in the specific format that I'm working in, yeah, I'm kind of like kind of move out into bigger conversations on humanity, political stuff, on social justice.
Through the lens of sexuality?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, that energy is like a carrier wave. I'm speaking from like philosophical backgrounds that I work in, but like it's a carrier wave of so much information, and if we follow that, it can take us right to the what we call like the fault lines. Human
Mm.
thought, misperception, how we organize power.
Mm.
What would be like an example of that, like in just like looking around your life or the political scene or the social cultural scene right now? Like, I'm curious how you would like take one example and how do you see or how do you notice sexuality playing a role in something that somebody else might say isn't sexual at all?
Mm. Well, great question. We'll start with just like the sexuality. What comes to mind? I don't about what you're asked is initially like the double bind that men I think are in around needing to be something but are also receiving a lot of judgment for what they're trying to be. And so there's a kind of like um, thing that men are experiencing. Um, it's like we culturally want men to be like strong and invulnerable in ways, but then also are like, yeah, just in constant judgment of them. And that's playing out like this, like in a really dramatic kind of way, or I think like on a continuum, as I see it, like on this spectrum, like really ossified patterns of like masculinity and even the leadership. But there's not like a deep ownership of the way we actually construct men to be this way. I think an example around like also like law enforcement or the people that we like lean on to create an order of things, and how much they have to amputate of themselves to be, or military people to be in really extreme traumatic experiencing situations, but then like that as a part of that, they also carry the marks of that and the lack of empathy and the inability to not be that. Here's an example. I was in the sauna and was listening to um, men. This was up when I lived up in Nevada City, and a lot of men who work in like the tree industry, which is extremely dangerous work. Like their lives are like threatened a lot, or like fire, protection, or building, and would just come out of high school and just get right into these jobs, and they're like having to do this like really hard physically confronting stuff, and listening to them and like having this reaction to me, like, oh, these guys are like mansplaining all the time and they're so annoying in the song, and like having this reaction. And a little, like maybe a preteen came in with his dad and everyone was like talking to this younger guy and it's like, oh, are you playing baseball? Or you know, and asking him all these like quintessential like American male funneling questions. And I was just like, fuck it, this is so annoying to hear, because who knows what this person, if he even cares about these, you know, baseball or whatever, or also is he even like identifying with masculinity in that way? Nobody even is considering that, so it's kind of truncated. But I'm also trying to consider and take into account like how much these men are in this kind of like, this is like their life in a lot of ways, you know. And just kind of seeing that double bind, yeah, politically. Like in the sex space, it's the same thing. They work with like heterosexual couples, like women wanting their men to be strong, and when they're actually vulnerable, a lot of women feel very unsafe at that point and like want to kind of like backtrack, because it's like they need him to be this pillar. And last thing I'll say, I guess, is there's like, you know, a continual kind of like in our culture, it's okay to like shame men for like not being alpha or not having a big dick or not being man enough, or it's still kind of like woven in a very culturally acceptable way and is part of the takedown strategy for combating the violence that we see. And it's like kind of replicating the same problem. So I know it's part of the psyche, and I know it's part of like how we imagine um, inadvertently what men are supposed to be. And that really kind of fits with like what people generally are like fantasizing about with the people that I'm working with, like in the gay community. The fantasies are like they're fantasizing about all these attributes and characteristics that embody the very like problematic elements as we experience them as people.
If you imagine
I'll
in
say.
that sauna, that was a lot, but I'm like, I'm like, "Grr." If you were in that sauna situation and these felt like liberated men to you, or whole, there was a wholeness to them, what
Yeah.
would be different?
Maybe like a comfort with just like not being so, I mean, it's being very like it's a caricature of like, how do I even do it? Like it's like just there's a kind of physical embodiment and like a vocal tone and like the stuff to talk about. I mean, it's such a really narrow range, and these are my associations, but maybe just kind of like a beingness and curious about who's walking in without needing to have that thing that they're doing reciprocally validated,
Mm.
which takes
Would
me right
it,
back to sex too. Go ahead.
yeah, no, would it be, I guess like in that scenario, where is that sort of cartoonish masculinity? Like, does it have a place there as well? Like, if that's really an authentic stance,
So
is,
is the question, is that like kind of authentic for them?
yeah, like if that's their authentic stance, is that also included in this spectrum of sort of like masculinity for
Hmm.
you, in particular?
Well, I think it's interesting. I love this question. I don't know. I mean, I guess it is authentic for them in the sense that's what they're organizing around. But it's what are they not expressing is my question. It's like, well, what are they not expressing? Like, actually, that was really scary, or I hate this job, or like, I really don't like providing for my family, or you know, I don't, whatever the thing is that they're maybe feeling, or I don't want to be a dad, and this is hard for me, but I am, and um, but then they would have that would be like a break where there's maybe empathy possible to connect with people outside of that, which seems to be like the big issue, I think.
Mhm. Connecting outside of their narrow like acculturated masculinity, it's like you can see that that's a strain to reach
Yeah,
outside that zone. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and negating like anything that doesn't really conform to that, including their wives, you know, in like
Mhm. Yeah, their feminine selves as well.
mm-mm.
Mhm.
It's like draw maybe more lines or more of a line between this like exploration of gender that you're sensitive to and that you experience as a man and work with men, and so witness it a lot as well. Like more, what are some of the lines that draw that into the energy of what we would call sex or sexuality or eros? Like like the gender part, gender and sex are very kind of
Blended.
overlapping, woven, and I'm curious what some of the lines are that you would draw to like why is it sex also? Why is it sexual or sexuality or eros also? Some of what you're talking about in this like you know, limiting gender conforming behavior.
I think I may, if I understand your question, I think that sex is the like it's like the energy that rouses our want for contact and also to mobilize outside of an inertia. And gender, like as I understand it, and I'm still working with like an understanding, is like a way that we're trying to create like an understanding of like what's like unknown to us. It's like a organizing template that we take on in a, everything is truly like open to translation, and we create these ways of being in our bodies based on the sex of the body, but also based on the, I guess, like the values that we're supposed to be inhabiting. Sex is going to rouse that want for contact. And for many people, I think it's like a way to have what they're trying to embody, like confirmed, like there's a narcissism inherent in it. And it can, some people go beyond that where it just kind of ceases to be like, you know, I'm not just attracted to a particular body or a particular gender, just like really curious about the energy that wants to connect. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean I'm just it's I mean it's not a question necessarily with an answer, but it's also just like I'm curious about like yeah, like when you say that if you identify sex or sexual energy as a mobilizing force that actually is maybe has as a primary function connection. Like, I mean, animal mating is like near universal. So it's like that is like physical connection, propagation of a species, all the giant hereditary genetics and weird stuff that we won't even understand in our lifetimes or many lifetimes about what makes these things come together. But like, yeah, it helps me understand like that like the people, like if we use the sauna as like a little sort of like picture box to look into around this,
So,
it's like those guys are also going to be might be thwarted in some way by a draw to connection, which is about ultimately kind of some strange mix of extreme vulnerability, even if the language that's being spoken is domination, like I fuck that person, or there's still like a tremendous vulnerability that's shared in a nakedness and a coming together and in responding to these very primal energies of join. And that these identities of gender really can thwart and get complicated and get like limit basically people's experience of connection. If sex is the motivator, underlying motivator, or sexual energy or desire, eros, trying to put lots of words out there because sex is such a, it's like, it's not the best descriptor necessarily, at least. So yeah, it's like, those are that's what I'm curious about. That's what I'm interested in, this exploration of how to see what is underneath the stuff that we're witnessing as gender, that we're witnessing as America, that we're witnessing as like, a political movement towards fascism, or the calcification of an orthodox far left, or all these things, that like what's under there and how is sex under there, and like, and I know you and I have talked before about like this human propensity to just completely forget that we're an animal species on a planet. We're like our specialness is almost like our calling card, but we're really not that special. Like we're mammals and we have hair and we mate. And it's like, so trying to look at like from an animal point of view, from a sexual point of view, from a, you know, just a life force point of view, what's going on under there? And these like strange manifestations that present as culture and as gender. It's like, that's really what Weena's holding up her
Before
finger, so I'll
I
let her
wanted to
speak.
say, before you answer, Finn, your microphone is sometimes will rub on your sweater and the sound isn't as clear as I think you would want it to be. So I'm telling you that.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Actually, thank you. That's happened before.
It's okay. It's the
Uh,
arm, but you're good like that. Carry on.
yeah, well, I mean, actually, the first thing that came to mind when you were describing that, Timothy, was like kind of like in a sexual experience, you mentioned the vulnerability, but I don't think most people are like acknowledging of that vulnerability as it's even happening. There's so much investment in not feeling that, not wanting it to arise because it brings in like an inhibitive, impulse. Like, is this okay? Am I safe? I mean, these are like, not many men would say these things out loud in a sexual experience. I don't think. And the body will say it for somebody, like it'll lose sensation or the hard on will go away or something will happen where it kind of, but that dimension isn't being acknowledged. And that is part of like, I think, yeah, maleness. And it also is like codified in the way we move, right? So you were asking like personal ways, like, since a little kid, trying to like lower my voice, walk a certain way, kind of minimize my queer presentation. But like in sex, uh, just because someone has a penis, for instance, it's like there's a functional fixedness about how someone thinks that they do something with that, or how to like actually move with this experience of pleasure. And like, what is that? Like, you're supposed to penetrate with it, or you're supposed to do it this way, or um, yeah, like the vulnerability is starting to rise, and so kind of like thrust faster or harder, or to try to surmount that and not let it be experienced. And yeah, and really underneath that, like, so as it relates to gender, is like, could the penis be like just like a place where sensation is experienced and pleasure is a gateway and then like an expansive quality for a man, and it doesn't like have to like make him kind of like move into this embodiment. Not that that's bad, or it's that's actually desirable sometimes, to have a particular kinds of intensity in classically masculine ways, but like that's just what it brings up when you ask that question in just like a body to body experience. I think, yeah, I mean, on the global scale, I'm not, excuse me, I don't think I'm super qualified to talk like broadly about like global politics, all the things that are happening, and like with versus fascism, as you mentioned. But I have like theories and thoughts about it as I relate, and kind of just like, what's the word? Well, it's riffing basically. It's kind of riffing, but like it's like there's like this instability and like an uncertainty and a need for a binding, and people are not necessarily good at or cultivating this kind of internal security and sense of like stability in themselves, and so leaning into like kind of a scaffolding. And the people that are up for that job are these people that we're describing, that are like rigid, like super rigid in the way that they are thinking, embodying, and people just kind of leaning into that, and disavowing their own responsibility to create stability in themselves, but also in communities. That's
And
my
therefore
riff.
accountability, right? Like
Totally.
when they bind that way, then they're also not responsible for the outcome because they're depending on this person or this unit. I'm thinking about range, and I'm thinking about like my husband says this all the time, and it comes to me often more times than I'd like him to know that it takes all kinds. He says that all the time. And in my head I translate that into range. And I'm thinking about like on one end of the spectrum are those really rigid, inflexible characters of humans that like, yeah, maybe we do need them at some level somewhere. They hold a specific function.
Mm.
But there's also this incredible range that I hear you advocate for, and myself as well, like that I would love for folks to see what else is possible. And I understand we can only do what we can in this lifetime, right? So we might not hit all those spaces, but that how much more connection, as you were saying, Tim, is possible when we have autonomy, bodily autonomy, agency, clarity of self, authenticity, a willingness to like exist beyond the patterns we've acquired. How much more is possible in terms of care for ourselves, but for others as well? And how much more is possible in terms of like sex, if we want to be particular and specific, like in the range of that, even there's asexual, which I think also exists as a not as a dysfunction, but as like a real state, right? Would you agree
Yeah,
with that? Yeah.
totally.
Okay. To the addict, right? Who's I know I hesitate to say they serve a function, but maybe they do. I just don't know. If I think of it more of an animal colony, perhaps there's some sort of like biological necessity for procreation. I don't know. I don't know. Um, yeah, and I guess I'm just thinking about range and how do you incorporate that into what you do with folks? Like, is it about identifying where they are in their own range or expanding range what does that bring up for you?
I love that question. Before I even go into that, I want to speak to what you were saying about range more broadly. I love that. I was listening to an evolutionary psychologist talk about these traits of like sociopathy and how in earlier development of human history that yeah, we needed like really empathetic, connection and like forming these. We also really did need actors within the communities to be like, not a problem, kill, and just like
Mhm.
have that sort of ability to take on those traits. But I mean, I think at this point we're kind of looking at like impact and like, consciousness as it's evolved too. And like kind of impact is like one of the things that comes to my mind, like being able to just acknowledge the kind of impact that we're making. And that would require a different set of skills for us to step into in our range. But
Like impact on other people or on the ecosystem.
yeah, like on our own,
Yeah.
yeah, totally on our own lives. Even like this question around like the question I've been asking myself is like, how am I also personally responsible for the situation that we're in? Because like that's one thing that drives me crazy about some of these conversations just only in a political discourse and like with liberals, because I'm like, just because we have these like values doesn't mean that we're not part of the problem. There's so much like it's like apolitical almost. Just because you can like say things or like use slogans doesn't mean that you're actually involved in trying to help create circumstances that turn things in a different direction. So it's kind of like, oh, well, most of my life I've been not involved because I've had like the privilege to do that because of like relative comfort and safety and whiteness and having what I need, and also my personal trauma, like not wanting to get near that again because I've been a hate crime victim survivor, and just, like this kind of basically to the entire political thing. Um, but if you get like a nation of people doing that, then like, we're not also taking responsibility for kind of the
That is
situation.
putting it at an arm's length for
Yeah.
listeners. Can't see Finn. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, as it relates to the person's sexual experience, I think we know what you were saying. Yeah, like it's like I try to like foster a sense of curiosity about like what are you looking for in sex as a kind of aggregate? Like what is it that is someone like really seeking a sense of like security or validation, and we want different things emotionally from them. But for a lot of men, I'm trying to initially start to cultivate like a vocabulary around the emotional dimension of what they're looking for so that they can understand that it's not the physical. Because of that truncation of men's like feeling world, sex is this like keyhole for like so many feelings that they're trying to get into contact with, or like a nebulous experience of just being that they just don't know how to like talk about it. So it's like trying to slow that down and try to get like, well, what is it that you're looking for? Is it like to kind of dissolve a little bit, or is it like looking for power in some sort of way? Is it looking for like a confirmation of your narcissism, or like all the different levels of like what might be coming up in a sexual experience, so that then they can actually start to think about range, because like it's not. I think most men think of range as like, what kind of like range of objects do I want,
Mm.
which is not not the thing about like the internal experience that's
Mm-hmm.
being sought. Yeah, and I think about like some categories around range too. Like there's a desire for kind of a range of attunements. And then like either to kind of like create more of a binding around the physicality or less binding. There's also some motivational factors, some like polarity, like in like kind of a fiery set of qualities. Like, do I want to have like power over? Do I want to feel like less than? Like, and give space for some of those like inherently, what's the word? Just like the power distribution being up or down, or just like
And
completely dissolved experience. Go ahead.
so do you work only with men?
I work mostly with men.
Yeah.
I've worked with female bodies and trans people, and I've worked with some lesbian couples, but
Mhm.
yeah, mostly gay men in specific.
And are you in your work helping them to identify, and it sounds like detangle and uncouple like sensation and feeling, or desire and action, or and in that untangling or uncoupling, as their ability to communicate or understand even through language what their experience is, does that shift those patterns? I
Hmm.
guess from a really basic point of view, I guess my question is like, if you're talking about this, does it change how they are when they do it?
It does.
Okay.
And I'll say this is massively simplistic, but I think there's truth in it.
Yeah.
That it's like what you're desiring is always going to bring you back to, at some point, a pain that you are having a hard time integrating.
Mm.
So whatever that might be, like formatively with parents and family, but it's like the desire is the lead magnet that pulls you into the experience of totality. And that could be like a whole lot of stuff that's like wanting to be touched and felt there, but then like it's like, no, 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 no. And that creates the repetitious, nature of desire and it being really fixed. But if someone gets really curious about that and tunes into it and starts to notice, like, oh yeah, like every time I go for that, like I also feel really like sick in some way, or I feel kind of like I'm not as like for a lot of men's desires, I've noticed there's like this like putting people on a pedestal in a particular way. And there's also like this kind of like at the same time a feeling of like feeling shitty about oneself that's baked into the desire. So if you really pay attention to that and suffer what's beneath that, then it's kind of shifts what the desire is and it kind of moves you into a different direction. And that could be any number of different emotional, painful places, but like anxiety, guilt, worry, a feeling of inferiority, humiliation, like all the things that men are supposed to like not feel, but they actually predicate the masculine presentation. So sex is the place where you're going to find that.
Right. It's the other side of the coin.
And you have to learn how
Yeah,
to pay
no,
attention to it and really feel it instead of just like, no, 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 next, 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 next.
Right. Mhm.
yeah, there's like a this idea when you said range, Weena, I thought you were when you were like raw and I heard the RA, I thought you were going to say race because a lot of what we were talking about made me think about race. But on the range question, just this idea that like when you're stuck in a certain shape, how, like, basically taken as a given that all of us have constrained ourselves to fit into something that is literally a constrained physical, psychological, emotional
Posture.
place.
Yeah.
It's like it is tight. It is not moving the way it could move. Like if we take that as a given, and I think the three of us do, and maybe a lot of people listening or in the world also can take that as a given, that there's a sense of liberation that can come from the decoupling that you're talking about, like it doesn't matter what your range ends up being. The point
You mean
is
where you are on
you're not in your full range by default. Like you've already shrunk and contorted
as
and
part of
puffed
acculturation,
up, and yeah,
right? Like it's part of
we've
like,
all done it. It's a
yeah,
given. So like the idea isn't really like, can we make them successful, wide-ranging? Can we make everyone bisexual and happy? Like it's not like creating like, and I'm not saying you were saying
yeah,
this, Weena, but it's like it's really just about whatever your range is, you won't know until you start to unbind,
right.
you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you said race, or when you said range and I thought race, it was like, it was coming on the heels of what you said, Finn, of like this, like basically there's a caricature, there's a how to be male, there's a how to be white. And these are three white people on this podcast talking to each other.
Mm-mm.
And it's like, this is how you do it. This is how you act. This is how you speak. This is how you express yourself physically. This is like all of that comes with it as well. And like the impact of these shapes when they're held culturally and prioritized and centered, the negative impact is profound. And it's
Well,
like,
because you have to leave
yeah,
folks out. Like if you're holding that specific shape and range, that means that the outliers you have to push out and re-identify with something more mainstream in order to stay
yeah,
safe. I mean, that's also a biological.
out there, like as just like in there,
And I
like
will say,
out
like,
there,
in the biology of us as mammals are that we want to be grouped up, right? That's safety. Being in an outlying position biologically is unsafe. So you're already in a position of needing to find belonging. And if you're in proximity to safety or the group, you are going to have a more of a range, more safety. And so I start thinking about like, if that's true, and that's sort of just, I think, animal behavior, and it will always be true in humans, as much as we have the power consciously to choose to include the outlier. There's still going to be some proximity to power, proximity to safety, proximity to herd, because that's where safety lies. And then I think, well, it just seems like range starts to become a different question then, because I mean, I don't know where I'm going, but outside, if everyone's included, there's a larger range. I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit of like,
what does utopia look
I
like?
no, I think like
Yeah.
I want outliers, I
Yeah.
guess, to exist. And if everyone's included, no one's outlying because I want the perspective of other, and you can't unless there's some distance, like cultural distance, which maybe that comes from other cultures. But like part of why, what I think is interesting growing up with Tim, who's a gay man, is that in that position, there's a bit of distance on a hetero experience, right? So, like, that's valuable. And I appreciate that perspective. And I don't want the wounding that comes with it or the othering that comes with that. But there's something about like, yeah, when we root for everyone to be included, I think we lose. Then we're like, it's sort of what you were speaking to earlier, the leftist kind of policy of like everyone's okay, everything is good, bring everyone in, bring all that, and lose, and basically watering down, diluting into some monoculture is really what's being advocated for, not range and ideals, not range in ethics, not range in, which is, you know, dicey, right? Like I don't necessarily want to be neighbors with somebody who is a raging racist, but like they also get to exist, I guess. And so there's like a weird feeling of like, if we're not going to dilute everything into a monoculture and we have range, it means really learning tolerance for things we hate, right? And like impulses we don't understand and policies that disgust us. And I guess I start feeling like, where in the line is there? I mean, when it comes to harm, that is a clear line for me of like, well, then it's not okay. Now it's not okay. Now I don't tolerate. But so that's that over here. And then when I think about it in terms of relationship and sex, that's still true about like, what do I tolerate? What difference am I tolerating because I'm being accepting or allowing? And I want to meet my own edge or whatever. And when is it not okay? And learning how to articulate those subtle, I think, edgy spaces within relationship and sexuality can be a really important skill in identifying it out in the world as well. Does that make sense? That was a lot.
Well,
Go.
I mean, again,
We're
I'm just
riffing.
using the words like riffing. I am riffing, but I mean, I think just because we don't know how to create that experience that we're looking for is a question of consciousness and kind of maybe the edge of what I think, should be trying to pursue. Because if we don't know how to create it, doesn't mean it can't be possible. Maybe, I don't know. This is just
Yeah.
a theory.
Right.
But also, I'm really curious about like kind of like, how these differences are, like when humans started banding together and creating socially knit groups, it's like, where did the impulses to violence or greed and, self-preservation kind of have to get tucked down? And so like as we evolve and evolve and evolve, like there's still this like dimension of our humanity that's like not it just doesn't like harmonize with our need to rely on each other. And I don't know what to do with all that or where that needs to
Art.
go.
Absolutely.
Oh, art.
That's
Yeah,
where
I
it
mean,
goes.
like
It goes
that's
to
my
art.
answer. Totally, that's my answer. Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Like if it doesn't have any
Symbolic
expression, I
action.
hear what you're saying because I think about that all the time. Like I will often have really like horrific, gory, like violent sort of fantasies in my authentic movement of
Yeah.
like, and I've talked about this with the woman I make work with all the time, but like I've for a long time had this like some fantasy that like there's a piece with like a raw liver. Like I want to feel a liver in my hands, or like
Yes.
there's something like that that feels really delicious to me. But again, like if I don't have a place of expression, where is that going? While I bite my children gently. But like there's something about that, like animal nature of violence or
Mm-hmm.
that needs expression. Yeah.
Totally.
And
And
like
we
that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like the idea of consent maybe is the bridge here. Is like, do you consent to being bitten right now? Like I do, which can be via words, or it can be like, in other words, like when we're contemplating where do we keep the range of humanity and its like entire savage, gory, violent, power hungry, greedy, rapey, like racist, different
rapey.
us and them. Like when we think about like where are there places for that,
Yeah.
like my proposal for the future utopia is like there are consensual spaces for that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be degraded. Okay, well, I want to degrade. Cool. Like y'all take room 4 down there and you can do that. And like, and in conscious aspects of sex, like that is what's happening. Like power dynamics, whether it's via like gender or size or age or race or like constraining, like BDSM, like all of this, which like feels like a really potent place for that to be acted out. And when you're in a conscious sexual space, it's sort of like, okay, that's cool that they're doing that. Like, couldn't we do that on a bigger scale too? Like, you know,
It
hey,
brings up
you're
a
killing
lot.
those people and they actually don't want to be killed. Like, that's not a consent
No.
scenario. But what if it were? I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
talking about
I mean, no,
killing.
no, those
Like,
are good questions. Yeah, yeah, no, like consent. I mean, people, the assisted suicide exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I'm thinking like it brings up a different layer for me as a woman. Because I think also consent, like you said, it's not always verbal,
I just
but
want to go
there's,
and out you as a heterosexual woman.
I'm
Also,
also a hetero here.
yeah.
Yeah, super
Yeah.
outed. That, what was I gonna say?
As a woman,
Right. Yes. Wait,
consensual
it's
spaces.
coming. Not always verb. Oh, there's so many mechanisms in place that would create. I mean, we know this from work in the trauma world, but like fawning and appeasement that are so much about consent, so deeply about consent, and actually using consent to regulate somebody else's nervous system out of a violent state, right? Like that's a real thing. I get so cautious around the ideas of like anything's okay as long as there's consent. And I was wondering, Finn, for you too, like especially in like as kink has become more accepted and like there's and for women, I mean, I don't know, but like my understanding is like younger generations of women are empowered and sexually free by accepting a really, big range of asks, specifically when it comes to something like bondage or submission, or because they're liberated. But that, and so, or there's a, possibly a traumatic response of fawning or appeasement in place that they can't even really begin to untangle enough to say it's okay. And so I start feeling cautious of like, yeah, it looks like consent. It looks like empowered sexuality, but I'm like, but is it? Or like, are they acting like you said so specifically from wound in agreeing to this?
Well, yes, but also acting from wound is unavoidable.
That's true.
So it's like instead of being like, oh, we shouldn't act from wound or wound is bad, it's like wound is inherently constitutive of like the human condition. And so
Mm.
how do we be with it versus like
Mm.
against it or like kind of, but also this idea of consent is interesting because there's like nuance around consent. I mean, there's like affirmative consent, which is like, yes, you can bite me and what y'all are describing, but that doesn't carry the same valence as like the actual desire to hurt somebody, which is, or to be hurt, right? There's a kind of like a a threshold of control, and then there's like limit consent, like what am I allowing myself to bend to and go beyond what I know about myself. So like it's
Mm.
kind of hard because you can't really adjudicate that. Like even if you say, yeah, of course you could bite me, and you may not actually be prepared to experience what comes up for you in that. And then it's like, have you crossed my boundary or not? I mean, it's kind of a fray area, which is why a lot of people don't want to be in that range. But I do think to what you're saying about kink, it's like archetypal, right? Where like the totality of human experience is also the abject, it's also the disgusting, it's also like the negation. It's also about these power dynamics we're talking about, which don't really square with our spiritual aspirations, but we are doing it. There's the banality of evil. It's like our ability to sit here and have this conversation is also predicated on a lot of evil happening. And I think just being in touch with that is really important and being aware of that. Kink is a place where people symbolically try to play with some of those qualities, but I don't think, yeah, it kind of waters it down, right? Like what is like the desire to hurt or to like be hurt, right? It can only go so far if we're also controlling it at the same time. So with
Wait,
someone
say
who,
more about that. Oh.
well, it's like, yes, you can like spank me, or yes, you can
Mm.
do this thing, right? Like there's a kind of like control trying to be exerted, which is also about like trying to affirm what I already know about myself versus like the place from which that desire is originating is a wound in some kind of way, even if it's not like a trauma.
Mm.
Um, there's a kind of like it wants me to go in there and I don't really know where I'm going to go with that. So trying to modulate intensity and safe word. They can serve as a kind of regulator, but they really can't like prevent you from going out into where it really wants to take you. And the sexual drive is highly escalating, so it's going to take you there, and it wants more, 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 more. So it's kind of a question that just presses for answers aren't really good answers about it, but some people are more willing to be in that kind of exploration where it's gray area. Yes, you're going to potentially encounter more injury than someone who's like, no, 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 all that perverse stuff isn't part of my sexuality. I situate my sexuality in my relationship. That's like an act of imagination. That's not like a real fiat kind of thing. I mean, there's still the perversity in all of us that wants to do these things.
I'm wondering like where else where do we allow ourselves to consensually accelerate past regulation?
Physical. I mean, the minute you said that, I was thinking of like, in fitness and in physical
Totally.
fitness, right? And in like training and as a dancer as well. Like you're pushing to your limit, you meet your edge, and then it like expands. You're like, oh, actually, I can do this much now, or I can dance for this long, or like that hurt, but now I'm okay. And now I have that range. It is like a really tricky, it's an interesting engagement with edge and a really difficult one to stay curious about, because I feel like when there's specifically in training, like if you can lift more, then you can lift more. And now that's just like, check, I can do that. What's next? As opposed to like, you might not be able to do that tomorrow, actually. You're not going to stay in the question. You're going to be like, got it. And so this idea of like ever expanding or playing inside that edge, and then you get injured and you get limited. So then you kind of, like that stuff happens automatically. But I do think in physical spaces, you're always working with that.
Love that.
Yeah. And that idea that like you will, like, even in the most extreme dysregulation, you're going to hit some limit. Like if we're talking as creatures who are alive and value life, then that ultimate limit is you're dead.
Totally.
But but yeah, there's like we said at the beginning when you were talking about this cell and the porousness of whether something can kind of expand out forever, indefinitely, like something will come back. But yeah, I thought of psychedelics as like experiences where people routinely say, I agree to go to a place that I have no idea what's going to happen, and it's going to possibly traumatize me. It's not like I agree to do this psychedelic in order to have a vision of my grandmother. I consent to that. And I consent also to meeting an angel and also seeing some amazing visuals. It's
Yeah, and this is going to help me come find my life purpose.
Yeah,
I'm
it's going to help
watching my
me
daughter arrive. So keep going. I'm here.
It's going to help me be more effective at work. Yeah,
Right.
but I think about psychedelics as maybe one area where we play with that too. Like, and I'm
Totally.
talking, when I say that, I mean specifically like I agree to step fully into the unknown right now.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I mean, I would imagine that's what is part of coaching people in sex is.
She's gone.
Well, I will say
I think this conversation was really too much for Weena, so she had to go.
Like, this is actually ringing up a lot more for me than I really consented to.
What were you about to say though?
Oh, well, what she was saying about physical movement being a place, I totally envision my workouts in that way. When I'm in my most like when I love my workouts the most is when I'm able to actually be in the emotional dimension rather than the visual, kind of harkening back to what you were saying, Lena, about like what am I seeing or how am I seeing, right? If I'm not like working out to see like myself conform to something that I want to be versus like I'm there to experience the energy, the intensity, the internal kind of like threshold and I've had moments where there's one experience that really comes to mind where I was at the gym and I kept feeling so judgmental of like I was watching like straight dudes like tell their girlfriends how to work out and it was driving me crazy.
Oh,
And I was just like fucking judgy. But realized I was like not focusing on my workout at all, you know, and just finally, as I was doing some squats, which I love doing barbell squats. And so I just like got into it and was like letting myself feel some of that anger and was able to go into a really like, you know, somatic feeling, blurred kind of space. And like, then I ended up like, it was really intense and I loved the workout. And then I hit this space where I just was able to cry spontaneously. And this felt so good. And then I was like
Mm,
very present. I was like,
mm,
oh, like I'm right here. And like just had, I completely didn't even know what was going on around me anymore.
yeah.
And that
I think that's
like
that
wanted to come
release,
out.
that rise and that release. Like there's something similar that has happened to me in authentic movement, a similar drive towards like anger or something kind of violent and an edge and and I'll move into it if um I mean, not injuring myself, sometimes I've messed up spaces because I just want to explore that expression for a while. But what happens after is that kind of release and an integration of what feels to me like activation rising, you know, parasympathetic response, and then parasympathetic resting, reintegrating and digesting. And it comes from like a laughing and crying or sort of like a weird mix of feelings. And it's kind of like, Tim, what you were asking, like, where does it go if we have these like violent or angry, or how do we, because they need to move. I do feel strongly that like, yeah, keeping that inside the tightness you were talking about, Finn, in that contained place is really not serving anyone. But if we can find expressions, and maybe we can't always, but even little pressure cooker moments of like where it comes out and something moves, then we have more capacity to be with the charge of it. Because I think when it gets so high and it gets so hot, we just numb out or dissociate
Mhm.
or shut it down, or it's scary, right? Like I have this memory, a really strong memory of my two stepsons. They were little, like 6 and 7, and the younger one has like a real like flare. He'll have a flare of rage that's like, whoa. And it came out on his brother and it was really intense. And I had to like pull them apart and sit him down. And I said, was that scary? And he said, yeah. Like it was, I can feel kind of emotional about it now, but like I could tell his anger, like hijacked his body because it was, the charge was so high that he went, you know, he was no longer accompanying this impulse. He was just overtaken by it. And that kind of modulation, it seems like something we learn as adults, but maybe, you know, so many of us don't, I guess. And that's why we need Finn Deerhart in our
Mhm.
lives.
Right.
Yeah.
I love what you're saying about, yeah, like we need to do something with those impulses. Because I really think we do. And I wonder, like, too, like if we just create like scapegoats for that, you
Yeah.
know?
Or vicarious. Yeah. Like vicarious, like go see, or drugs, right? I feel like the
Mhm.
big excuse is like alcohol and drugs. Like that's my,
Mhm.
now I have permission to move this stuff through.
Mhm. Timing, how are we doing?
I think we have to wrap soon because my daughter's here, but
Yeah.
this is a new landscape of self-dismissal from the bus. So she's 10. So she's walked herself a block, which
Oh,
is
wow.
new. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's cool. I
Yeah,
remember
I've
that feeling of freedom when you're like, I'm out in the world. I'm all by myself. I don't have an adult.
Mhm.
I used to have to, we went to the same elementary school and I used to have to go to a daycare after where my mom would pick me up, but Melinda and Tim could walk home. And I hated that. And so one time I just walked home by myself. And
Oh,
then and I got there and Melinda was like, "What are you doing here?" And then we had to call mom and say that I wasn't at the daycare because I was like, but I remember that walk home very much. Talk about bodily autonomy. Like,
Ben,
love
thanks
that.
for hanging out with us and being in a novel situation with a new person and letting it riff and see what comes up for us and connect in this way. I really appreciate it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's been fun.
So
Like,
fun, Ben. It's so lovely to meet you. And now I feel like we have more
mm,
to do together, more to talk about. And I hope I get to see you in San Francisco. If I, whenever I'm there next.
I would say, are you planning to be here at any?
I would like to. Wow, my camera's really freaking out.
You get
I
that
would
soft
like to.
Vaseline filter.
Yeah, God. I just have to
Come
stay
back.
here. No plans yet, but if I do one day, or if you're ever in New York, please let me know.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to connect more.
Ben, thanks for your time. So generous, and for sort of exploring all these ideas and questions with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, totally. I really love talking about this kind of stuff, and I feel like I'm like now it's just kind of opening up where I'm like, we could totally go another hour. It's like
Oh,
getting,
completely.
yeah.
Yeah, no, part 2 is coming. For
Okay.
sure.
So Finn is an amazing, dear person in my life, a close friend, and somebody who inspires me on a regular basis. It was so sweet to watch him meet you, Weena, to have two people I know get to know each other. And it was so beautiful to be in a dance, a 3-person dance with him, of letting ourselves kind of soften into our own connections and comfort, and being able to explore things as essential as the cell, or animals, or force, power, sexuality. It was such a delight and cool experience to like feel us like sink into that space together and really be in touch with some essential stuff and like want more.
Yes, that's where I'm left. I'm left wanting more. I want to dive into deeper conversations with Finn, specifically around how he works with something as mysterious and powerful as sexuality. I'm so interested in the intersection of that with impulse and with movement. And I can just tell like we're just starting. It feels like I need to now jump into another 2-hour podcast with him. And I have a feeling, yeah.
Well, luckily, Finn is an author and he's writing
Oh, wow.
fairly prolifically right now. And so in the show notes, you'll be able to find his Substack and subscribe. But yeah, he's deep in memoir territory and hoping to have a published book soon.
I can't wait. Thank you so much for listening. More to come.